Crown Princess Galen of the Trill royal family recoiled in horror as she witnessed the human fertility clinic's procedures. Her blue-tinged skin paled, and her antennae twitched violently. The sight of in vitro fertilization and artificial insemination left her feeling nauseous and deeply disturbed. "This is an abomination," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with disgust. "How can humans call this breeding?" The Trill delegation, visiting Earth as part of a state visit, shared the princess's revulsion. Their species, known for its natural reproductive cycle lasting decades, viewed human breeding methods as unnatural and barbaric. What was meant to be a routine diplomatic engagement had quickly devolved into a crisis that threatened the very foundation of Earth-Trill relations. Within hours, the Trill government issued an ultimatum. Either humans cease these monstrous practices, or all diplomatic ties would be severed and trade sanctions imposed. The United Earth government, caught off guard by the severity of the Trill reaction, scrambled to find a solution. In a desperate bid to salvage the alliance, they turned to their most unconventional diplomat, Philip Powell. Known for his unorthodox problem-solving skills, Powell had a track record of resolving seemingly impossible diplomatic situations. As he was briefed on the situation, a daring plan formed in his mind. "I propose a direct demonstration," Powell announced to the stunned Earth officials. "I will personally showcase human mating practices to Princess Galen in a controlled environment." The proposal sent shockwaves through both Earth and Trill societies. Conservative factions on both sides protested vehemently, claiming it would lead to further degradation of traditional values. Nevertheless, the Trill royal family reluctantly agreed, seeing it as a final chance to understand human reproduction before cutting ties completely. Powell was given 1 week to change the princess's mind about human breeding techniques. The fate of Earth-Trill relations hung in the balance, and the pressure was immense. As he prepared for his unconventional mission, Powell delved deeper into Trill culture, uncovering a complex caste system based on breeding. The royalty at the top of this hierarchy prided themselves on their superior genetics. This revelation added another layer of complexity to Powell's task. He now had to navigate not only cultural differences, but also deeply ingrained biological prejudices. The United Earth government, recognizing the gravity of the situation, provided Powell with access to state-of-the-art medical facilities and reproductive technology. Their hope was to present human breeding methods in the best possible light. As the demonstration date approached, tensions between Earth and Trill reached a boiling point. Military forces on both sides were placed on high alert, their fingers hovering over metaphorical triggers. The once friendly alliance now teetered on the brink of conflict. Powell, feeling the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders, began to doubt his abilities. Could he really change the mind of an alien princess who viewed human reproduction as an affront to nature itself? As he entered the specially prepared chamber where Princess Galen awaited, Powell took a deep breath, steeling himself for the most important diplomatic mission of his life, and quite possibly the most unusual in human history. The fate of two worlds now rested on his ability to explain and demonstrate the intricacies of human breeding techniques to a horrified alien royal. As the door closed behind him, Powell knew that the next few hours would determine the course of interstellar relations for generations to come. As Powell entered the chamber, the air seemed to thicken with tension. Princess Galen's iridescent skin shimmered, her antennae twitching nervously. The room, a blend of clinical efficiency and subtle comfort, was designed to put both parties at ease while allowing for comprehensive monitoring. "Welcome, Your Highness," Powell said, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "I understand this is unconventional, to say the least." Galen's eyes narrowed, her posture rigid. "Unconventional is an understatement, Mr. Powell. I hope you realize the magnitude of what you're attempting here." Powell nodded, moving towards a control panel. With a few swift movements, he activated a series of holographic displays that filled the air between them. "Let's start with the basics, shall we?" As Powell began his explanation of human reproduction, Galen's expression morphed from thinly veiled disgust to outright horror. Her skin paled to a sickly blue-green as Powell described the relatively short human gestation period and the frequency of human mating. 9 months? Galen gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you mate Multiple times a year? Powell tried to keep his tone neutral. Yes, Your Highness, it's perfectly natural for our species. But it was when Powell demonstrated the use of contraceptives that Galen's revulsion peaked. She recoiled, her antennae flattening against her head. You interfere with the natural process? This is abhorrent. Sensing the princess's mounting distress, Powell quickly changed tack. He dimmed the clinical holograms and instead projected images of human couples in various non-intimate settings. Your Highness, perhaps we've approached this from the wrong angle, he said softly. Let me explain something that goes beyond the physical aspects of human reproduction, our concept of courtship. Galen's antennae perked up slightly, curiosity overtaking disgust. Courtship? Powell nodded, relieved to see a change in her demeanor. Yes, for humans, emotional bonds often precede physical intimacy. We don't just mate for reproduction. We form deep, lasting connections with our partners. He went on to share personal anecdotes about human relationships, carefully omitting explicit details while emphasizing the emotional aspects. As he spoke, Galen's posture gradually relaxed, her eyes fixed on the changing images of human couples, laughing, holding hands, and sharing tender moments. This bonding, Galen said slowly, her voice tinged with wonder. It serves no reproductive purpose? Powell smiled. Not directly, no. But it strengthens our society, provides emotional support, and yes, often leads to the desire for children. It's an integral part of our culture. As their discussion deepened, neither Powell nor Galen were aware of the drama unfolding outside. In the control room, Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored their vital signs, her brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, her comm link crackled to life. Dr. Vasquez, we have a situation. Captain Sarah Thomas's voice came through, tense and urgent. The Trill Royal Guard is demanding access to the chamber. They're concerned about the princess's prolonged exposure to human ideas. Vasquez's eyes widened. Denied. We can't interrupt now. We're at a critical juncture. Understood, Thomas replied. But be advised, they're threatening to breach the perimeter. We're holding them off for now, but this could escalate quickly. Inside the chamber, oblivious to the brewing conflict, Galen's curiosity about human mating practices had grown. She leaned forward, her luminescent skin pulsing with interest. This kissing you mentioned, it's a prelude to mating? Powell felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. Well, not necessarily. It's an expression of affection, sometimes passionate, sometimes just tender. Galen's antenna quivered. Show me. Powell blinked, caught off guard. Your Highness, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Mr. Powell, Galen said, her voice taking on a regal tone, you came here to demonstrate human mating practices. I am officially requesting a practical demonstration of this kissing. Swallowing hard, Powell glanced towards the observation window, hoping to catch Dr. Vasquez's eye. The xenobiologist nodded cautiously, giving him the go-ahead. As Powell approached Galen, his heart raced. The fate of two worlds rested on this moment. He leaned in slowly, giving the princess ample time to reconsider or pull away. Their lips met just as alarms blared throughout the facility. Powell started to pull back, but Galen's hand shot out, gripping his arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide, her skin suddenly glowing with an intensity that lit up the room. What? What is happening to me? Galen gasped, her voice a mix of fear and exhilaration. Before Powell could respond, the chamber door burst open. Commander Zax of the Trill Royal Guard stormed in, his face contorted with rage. Behind him, Captain Thomas and her security team formed a defensive line. Step away from the princess, Zax roared, reaching for what appeared to be a weapon. Powell raised his hands, trying to defuse the situation. Commander, please, this is a misunderstanding. But Galen interrupted, her voice ringing with authority despite her obvious disorientation. Stand down, Commander. I ordered this demonstration. Zax froze, his eyes darting between Galen's glowing form and Powell's raised hands. The tension in the room was palpable, a powder keg ready to explode. In the control room, Dr. Vasquez's instruments were going haywire. "Captain," she called out, her voice urgent, "the princess is experiencing some kind of biochemical reaction. We need to—" Her words were cut off as Galen suddenly collapsed, her skin pulsing with waves of bioluminescence. Powell lunged to catch her, but Zax was faster, scooping the princess into his arms and glaring at the human with undisguised hostility. "What have you done to her?" Zax snarled, backing towards the door. Powell stood helplessly, watching as the Trill delegation retreated with their unconscious princess. Captain Thomas approached, her hand on her weapon. "Sir, we need to secure you. This situation has become complicated." As Thomas led him away, Powell's mind raced. The demonstration had veered wildly off course, potentially dooming Earth-Trill relations. Yet the princess's unexpected reaction hinted at possibilities he couldn't yet fathom. With the deadline looming and tensions at a breaking point, Powell realized that salvaging this diplomatic mission would require more than just explaining human reproduction. It might require redefining the very nature of interspecies relations. Yet as Powell was led away, his ears picked up the unmistakable sound of alarms blaring throughout the facility. The chamber's soundproofing, designed to ensure privacy during the delicate demonstration, suddenly failed, allowing the cacophony of chaos to flood in. Powell and Princess Galen exchanged alarmed glances, their previous interaction momentarily forgotten as the gravity of the situation dawned on them. The diplomat's mind raced, years of experience kicking into high gear as he formulated a plan to diffuse the escalating tension. "Your Highness," Powell said urgently, "we need to address both sides immediately. Our presence might be the only thing that can prevent this from spiraling out of control." Galen nodded, her skin still pulsing with an otherworldly glow. "Agreed, Mr. Powell. Lead the way." As they approached the chamber door, Powell could hear the commotion outside. The voices of Commander Zax and Captain Thomas rose above the din, their tones sharp with scarcely controlled hostility. The hiss of energy weapons being primed sent a chill down Powell's spine. Taking a deep breath, Powell keyed open the door. He stepped out first, instinctively positioning himself as a shield for the princess. The scene that greeted them was one of terrifying chaos. On one side stood Commander Zax and his Trill Royal Guard, their crystalline armor glinting menacingly under the harsh facility lights. Opposite them, Captain Thomas and her Earth security forces formed a defensive line, their postures tense and ready for action. The appearance of Powell and the luminous Princess Galen caused an immediate ripple effect. Weapons lowered slightly as all eyes turned to the unlikely pair. Powell seized the moment of stunned silence. "Gentlemen, ladies," he addressed both factions, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "stand down immediately. This is a diplomatic mission, not a battlefield." Before either side could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Powell." All heads turned to see a tall, distinguished man striding confidently into the fray. Ambassador Marcus Thorne, Earth's senior diplomat, had arrived on the scene. His presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention without uttering another word. Thorne's piercing gaze swept across the assembled groups, his expression a perfect blend of disappointment and persistence. "I propose an immediate joint session between Earth and Trill representatives. We will address the concerns of both sides in a civilized manner, as befits our respective cultures." The ambassador's calm demeanor and authoritative tone had an almost immediate effect. Weapons were slowly holstered, and the palpable tension in the air began to dissipate. Commander Zax and Captain Thomas exchanged wary glances before nodding their agreement. As the immediate threat of violence receded, attention once again focused on Princess Galen. Her bioluminescence had intensified, bathing the area in an ethereal glow. Suddenly, she doubled over, gasping. "Your Highness," Powell exclaimed, moving to support her. Dr. Elena Vasquez pushed through the crowd, her medical scanner already whirring to life. "Make way," she ordered, kneeling beside the princess. Her eyes widened as she interpreted the readings. "This is unprecedented. Her physiological responses are accelerating at an alarming rate." A slender Trill with striking purple markings stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Lyra Zen, the princess's personal physician," she introduced herself, producing her own scanning device. These readings, they're consistent with our mating cycle, but compressed from years into minutes. The two doctors exchanged meaningful looks before Vasquez spoke. We need to get her to a medical bay immediately. Ambassador Thorne, we may need to postpone that joint session. Thorne nodded gravely. Of course, the princess's health takes priority. As they rushed Princess Galen to the medical bay, Powell found himself jogging alongside her hover stretcher, an inexplicable feeling of responsibility compelling him to stay close. Dr. Vasquez noticed his presence and pulled him aside as they entered the sterile white room. Mr. Powell, she said, her voice low and urgent, preliminary scans show traces of your DNA in the princess's system. It seems the kiss has triggered some sort of rapid evolution in her reproductive system. We're dealing with uncharted territory here. Powell's mind reeled at the implications. What does this mean for Earth-Trill relations? Before Vasquez could respond, Ambassador Thorne appeared at Powell's elbow. It means, Mr. Powell, that we have a diplomatic situation unlike any we've faced before. I'm organizing emergency meetings as we speak. The ramifications of this incident could reshape our entire approach to interspecies relations. As the medical team swarmed around Princess Galen, Powell found himself torn. His diplomatic training urged him to join Thorne in damage control, but a growing personal concern for the princess tugged at him. Sir, Powell addressed Thorne, his decision made, with your permission, I'd like to remain here. I feel responsible for the princess's condition. Thorne studied Powell for a moment before nodding. Very well. Keep me informed of any developments. As Thorne left to manage the diplomatic fallout, Powell turned back to the medical bay. Through the transparent partition, he could see Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen hunched over various instruments, their faces masks of concentration as they worked to understand the princess's rapidly changing physiology. Commander Zax appeared at Powell's side, his earlier hostility replaced by a wary curiosity. You truly care for her well-being, don't you, human? Powell met the commander's gaze steadily. I care about the success of this mission, Commander, and right now, Princess Galen's health is crucial to that success. Zax nodded slowly, a newfound respect evident in his posture. As they stood watch over the princess, Powell couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected turn of events was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would challenge the very foundations of human-trill relations and perhaps redefine the nature of interspecies interaction itself. As Powell stood vigil outside the medical bay, his mind raced with the implications of the unfolding situation. The princess's condition had stabilized somewhat, but the rapid changes in her physiology continued to baffle both Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen. Mr. Powell, Dr. Vasquez called, gesturing for him to enter the medical bay. We've made a discovery you need to hear. Powell stepped inside, the sterile air tinged with the faint scent of ozone from the medical equipment. Princess Galen lay on a biobed, her skin still pulsing with an otherworldly glow, though less intense than before. She offered him a weak smile as he approached. Dr. Zen, her purple markings shimmering under the harsh lights, activated a holographic display. What we're seeing is unprecedented, she explained, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. The princess's reproductive system is evolving, creating a hybrid of human and trill biology. Powell's eyes widened as he studied the intricate hologram. What does this mean for Earth-Trill relations? Before either doctor could respond, Ambassador Thorne strode into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. It means, Mr. Powell, that we're on the brink of a diplomatic and scientific revolution. He turned to the doctors. I'm convening an emergency session of the Interspecies Medical Ethics Committee. We need to establish guidelines for this research immediately. As Thorne departed to make arrangements, Powell found himself drawn to Princess Galen's side. How are you feeling, Your Highness? Galen's antennae quivered slightly as she spoke, her voice stronger than he expected. Confused, Mr. Powell, but also exhilarated. I feel as though I'm on the cusp of something extraordinary. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Zax, his crystalline armor glinting as he entered the medical bay. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Powell so close to the princess. "Mr. Powell," Zack said, his tone clipped, "I must insist that you limit your interactions with Princess Galen. This situation has already progressed far beyond acceptable boundaries." Powell opened his mouth to protest, but Ambassador Thorne's timely return diffused the tension. "Actually, Commander," Thorne interjected smoothly, "I believe Mr. Powell's continued involvement is crucial. His presence seems to have a stabilizing effect on the princess's condition." Zax bristled visibly, but held his tongue, clearly unwilling to challenge the ambassador's authority. As the days passed, the facility transformed into a hive of activity. The Interspecies Medical Ethics Committee, a diverse group of human and Trill experts, arrived and immediately began deliberations. Their heated debates echoed through the corridors, the weight of their decisions palpable in every discussion. Powell found himself caught in a whirlwind of diplomatic meetings and medical briefings. He spent every free moment with Princess Galen, their conversations ranging from the intricacies of human culture to the potential impact of her transformation on both their species. One evening, as Powell sat with Galen in the medical bay, she turned to him with an intensity that caught him off guard. "Mr. Powell," she said, her skin pulsing with a soft, mesmerizing light, "I want to learn more about human mating practices, beyond just kissing." Powell felt heat rise to his face, acutely aware of the cameras monitoring the room. "Your Highness, I'm not sure that would be appropriate given the current circumstances." Before Galen could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Captain Thomas's voice crackled over the intercom. "Security alert. All personnel to designated safe zones. This is not a drill." Powell instinctively moved to shield Galen, his diplomatic training giving way to a more primal protective instinct. Dr. Vasquez burst into the room, her face pale. "We've received intelligence that a group of Trill purists is planning to sabotage the facility. We need to move the princess to a secure location immediately." As they prepared to evacuate, a new figure strode into the medical bay. The man's presence seemed to fill the room, his piercing eyes scanning the scene with calculated interest. "Dr. Alexei Volkov," he introduced himself, his accent hinting at his Russian origins. "I believe I can be of assistance in accelerating our understanding of the princess's condition." Powell felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard of Volkov's reputation for pushing ethical boundaries in genetic research. The scientist's arrival added yet another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. As security personnel swarmed the facility, transforming it into a virtual fortress, Powell found himself at the center of a perfect storm. The threat of sabotage loomed large, ethical debates raged on, and Princess Galen's condition continued to evolve in ways that challenged the very foundations of human-Trill relations. In the midst of this chaos, a message arrived that sent ripples of concern through both the human and Trill contingents. Princess Lyra, Galen's younger sister and a staunch traditionalist, was en route to Earth. Her impending arrival promised to add fuel to an already explosive situation. Powell stood at the window of the secure medical bay, watching as additional security measures were implemented across the facility. The weight of the unfolding events pressed heavily upon him. He turned back to Princess Galen, her bioluminescent form a beacon of both hope and uncertainty in the dimly lit room. As their eyes met, Powell realized that the fate of two worlds now rested on the outcome of this unprecedented encounter. The lines between diplomacy, science, and personal feelings were blurring, and he found himself stepping into uncharted territory with every passing moment. As if on cue, the facility's warning sirens blared to life, their shrill wails echoing through the corridors. "Incoming shuttle detected," announced the facility's AI. "Identity confirmed. Princess Lyra of Trill." Powell's stomach tightened. He'd been briefed on Princess Lyra's conservative stance and her vocal opposition to human-Trill relations. Her arrival couldn't have come at a worse time. Ambassador Thorne strode into the medical bay, his face a mask of diplomatic calm. "Mr. Powell, we need to prepare Princess Galen for her sister's arrival. This situation requires delicate handling." As they helped Galen into a more presentable position, Powell couldn't help but notice the way her skin pulsed with a soft, almost nervous light. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, only to quickly withdraw it as Commander Zax entered the room, his crystalline armor reflecting the princess's bioluminescence. "Princess Lyra's shuttle has landed," Zax reported. "She's being escorted to the briefing room as we speak." The next few minutes passed in a flurry of activity. Powell found himself standing beside Princess Galen as the medical bay doors slid open, revealing Princess Lyra. The newcomer's eyes widened in shock as she took in her sister's altered appearance. "By the ancient stars!" Lyra gasped, her voice a mix of horror and disbelief. "What have they done to you, Galen?" Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "What we've done, Your Highness, is push the boundaries of science and diplomacy." All eyes turned to the speaker, a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and a thick Russian accent. Dr. Alexei Volkov strode into the room, his very presence seeming to shift the atmosphere. "Dr. Volkov," Ambassador Thorne said, his tone cautious, "I wasn't aware you had been cleared to join this project." Volkov smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Time is of the essence, Ambassador. My expertise in genetic research could prove invaluable in understanding Princess Galen's unique condition." Princess Lyra's face hardened. "I demand an immediate halt to all experiments. We're taking Galen home, where she belongs." As arguments erupted around them, Powell noticed Dr. Volkov quietly activating a handheld device. Before he could question the scientist's actions, the world around them shimmered and changed. Powell blinked, finding himself in what appeared to be a lush garden. Beside him, Princess Galen looked around in wonder, her bioluminescence pulsing with excitement. "What is this?" she asked, reaching out to touch a nearby flower. "A virtual reality simulation," Powell realized aloud. "But why?" His question was cut short as Dr. Volkov's voice echoed around them. "Mr. Powell, Princess Galen, welcome to the first in a series of immersive experiences designed to explore human courtship and mating practices." Powell felt heat rise to his face as he understood the implications. "Dr. Volkov, this is highly inappropriate. We haven't received clearance from the Ethics Committee." "Sometimes, Mr. Powell," Volkov interrupted, "science must move faster than bureaucracy. Now, shall we begin?" Over the next several hours, Powell found himself guiding Princess Galen through a series of increasingly intimate scenarios. From a simple walk in the park to a candlelit dinner, each simulation pushed the boundaries of their comfort zones. Outside the virtual world, chaos reigned. Princess Lyra, upon discovering her sister's participation in the simulations, attempted to physically disconnect Galen from the equipment. Commander Zax restrained her, torn between his duty to the royal family and the potential scientific breakthroughs at stake. As the simulations progressed, Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen monitored Galen's physiological responses with growing amazement. Her bioluminescence patterns shifted and changed, mimicking human biological responses to attraction and arousal. "It's incredible," Dr. Zen murmured, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "Her body is adapting, creating a perfect blend of human and trill biology." In the virtual world, Powell and Galen found themselves on a moonlit beach. The princess turned to him, her eyes shimmering with a mix of curiosity and something deeper. "Powell," she said softly, using his name without title for the first time, "I want to try something." Before he could respond, she leaned in and kissed him. Unlike their first accidental kiss, this one was deliberate, exploratory. Powell felt a surge of electricity course through him, and Galen's skin erupted in a dazzling display of light. Their moment was shattered by alarms blaring in the real world. Captain Thomas's voice cut through the simulation. "Security breach! All personnel to defensive positions!" The virtual world dissolved around them, leaving Powell and Galen blinking in the harsh light of the medical bay. Princess Lyra stood nearby, her face a mask of conflicting emotions as she took in her sister's transformed appearance. "What's happening?" Galen asked, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Ambassador Thorne burst into the room, his usual composure slipping. "A group of Trill purists has breached the facility's outer defenses. They're led by a scientist named Dr. Vex." Powell's mind raced. He'd heard whispers of this radical faction, but never imagined they'd go this far. What do they want? Thorne's expression darkened. They want to purify Princess Galen, even if it kills her in the process. As security personnel swarmed the facility, Powell found himself at a crossroads. His diplomatic training urged caution, but his growing feelings for Galen demanded action. The princess herself seemed transformed, not just physically, but in her bearing and confidence. "I can help," Galen said, standing tall despite the tubes and wires still connected to her body. "My unique position might allow me to negotiate with Dr. Vex and his followers." Princess Lyra, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. I don't understand what's happening to you, sister, but I can see you're no longer the same person who left our world." She paused, conflict clear in her eyes. Perhaps there's more to these human ways than I realized." As they prepared to face the oncoming threat, Powell caught sight of Dr. Volkov slipping out of the room, a data drive clutched tightly in his hand. The scientist's eyes met Powell's for a brief moment, a silent challenge passing between them. With the facility under siege, diplomatic relations hanging by a thread, and a controversial experiment yielding unprecedented results, Powell realized they were standing on the precipice of a new era in human-trill relations. The next few hours would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. Princess Galen's hand found his, her touch sending a familiar surge of energy through him. As they stepped out to face the chaos together, Powell knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same. The chaos that engulfed the facility seemed to fade into the background as Powell and Princess Galen stepped forward, hand in hand, to face the tumultuous crowd. The air crackled with tension as they approached the makeshift podium, where both human and Trill representatives waited with held breath. Princess Galen's bioluminescence pulsed with a soft, calming glow as she began to address the assembled delegates. "Esteemed members of the Human Trill Joint Committee, my fellow Trills, and our human hosts," she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We stand at a crossroads of—" Her words were cut short by a sudden commotion at the back of the room. Dr. Vex, the leader of the Trill Purist faction, burst through the security cordon, a small device clutched in his hand. Before anyone could react, he activated it, releasing a fine mist into the air. "For the purity of Trill!" he shouted as security personnel tackled him to the ground. The effect was almost instantaneous. The Trill delegates began to shift uncomfortably, their skin flushing with heightened color. Princess Galen, however, reacted differently. Her bioluminescence flared brightly, and she stumbled, gripping the podium for support. Powell moved quickly to her side, concern etched on his face. "Your Highness, are you all right?" As his hand touched her arm, Galen let out a soft gasp. Her eyes, when they met Powell's, were filled with an intensity he'd never seen before. Without warning, she pulled him close and kissed him deeply, her body pressing against his with unmistakable desire. The room erupted into chaos. Human delegates stared in shock, while Trill representatives alternated between outrage and fascination. Princess Lyra, who had been watching from the sidelines, rushed forward, her face a mask of confusion and concern. Ambassador Thorne, ever the quick thinker, seized control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," he called out over the din. "What we are witnessing is an unexpected but potentially groundbreaking development in human-Trill relations." As security personnel worked to restore order, Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen hurried to examine Princess Galen, who had finally broken away from Powell, her chest heaving and skin glowing with a pulsating light. "Fascinating," Dr. Zen murmured, studying her readings. "The pheromone seems to have triggered a human-like sexual response in the princess's hybrid physiology." Ambassador Thorne conferred briefly with the scientific team before addressing the assembly once more. "In light of these extraordinary circumstances, I propose an immediate scientific study to explore the full implications of Princess Galen's unique condition." The proposal sent ripples of shock and intrigue through the crowd. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her voice steady as she outlined a hastily formulated plan. "We suggest a controlled experiment in human-Trill mating, with Princess Galen and Mr. Powell as voluntary participants. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Powell and Galen. The princess, still visibly affected by the pheromone, nodded her assent. Powell, his diplomatic training warring with his personal feelings, took a deep breath before speaking. If Princess Galen is willing, I volunteer to participate in this experiment for the sake of scientific progress and interspecies understanding. As murmurs of approval, shock, and dissent rippled through the crowd, Princess Lyra pushed her way to the front, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions locked onto her sisters. "Galen," she said softly, "are you certain about this?" Galen reached out, taking her sister's hand. "I am, Lyra. This could change everything for our people, for both our species. Will you support me?" Lyra hesitated, years of traditional beliefs warring with the undeniable evidence before her. Finally, she nodded. "I will, but I want to observe, to understand." As preparations for the experiment began in earnest, the facility hummed with activity. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen worked feverishly to set up a specialized chamber, equipped with advanced monitoring systems to track every aspect of the unprecedented encounter. Commander Zax paced anxiously outside the chamber, his crystalline armor reflecting the frantic movements of the scientists and technicians. "This goes against every protocol," he muttered to Captain Thomas, who stood nearby, coordinating human security efforts. Thomas nodded grimly. "Sometimes, Commander, we have to adapt to circumstances beyond our control. Our job now is to ensure everyone's safety, regardless of our personal feelings on the matter." As Powell and Princess Galen were led to the experiment chamber, a commotion erupted near the holding cells. Dr. Volkov, who had been apprehended earlier for attempted data theft, had managed to pass a small data chip to one of Dr. Vex's followers during his transfer. The follower, disguised as a maintenance worker, slipped away unnoticed, making his way towards the environmental control room. With the entire facility focused on the impending experiment, security protocols had momentarily lapsed, allowing the infiltrator to gain access to critical systems. Inside the experiment chamber, Powell and Galen stood facing each other, the air between them charged with anticipation and nervousness. The princess's skin shimmered with a soft, pulsating light that seemed to reflect her rapid heartbeat. "Are you sure about this?" Powell asked softly, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching. Galen nodded, her eyes meeting his with commitment. "I am, for science, for our people, and," she paused, a faint smile playing on her lips, "for us." As they began to tentatively explore this new frontier of human-trill relations, the observers watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and personal investment. Princess Lyra, true to her word, observed from a separate room, her expression unreadable as she witnessed her sister's transformation. Unbeknownst to all, Dr. Vex's follower had reached the environmental controls. With trembling hands, he inserted the data chip containing Dr. Volkov's stolen research. The system accepted the new parameters, and a potent trill pheromone began to seep into the experiment chamber's air supply. As Powell and Galen's interaction intensified, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened in horror as she saw the readings from the chamber's atmospheric sensors. "We have a security breach," she shouted. "Unknown substance detected in the air supply." Inside the chamber, Galen suddenly stiffened, her bioluminescence flaring erratically. Powell, sensing something was wrong, tried to pull away, but found the chamber door locked. "What's happening?" he called out, his voice tinged with panic as he held the trembling princess in his arms. Outside, chaos reigned as security forces scrambled to locate the source of the contamination. Dr. Zen worked frantically to override the chamber's lockdown, while Ambassador Thorne attempted to maintain order among the panicking delegates. As the pheromone levels in the chamber continued to rise, Powell and Princess Galen found themselves trapped in a maelstrom of conflicting biological impulses and genuine emotion. The fate of their personal relationship, and potentially the future of human-trill relations, hung in the balance as the crisis unfolded around them. The pheromone-laden mist seeped through the air vents, enveloping Powell and Princess Galen in its potent embrace. As the chamber door sealed with a resounding click, Powell's heart raced, realizing they were trapped. Galen's eyes widened, her bioluminescence flaring erratically. "Powell," she gasped, her voice strained. Something's happening to me. Powell reached for her, but she jerked away, her body twisting in an unfamiliar motion. Suddenly, she began to move in a complex pattern, her limbs flowing with an otherworldly grace. It was a trill mating dance, Powell realized, watching in fascination as Galen's movements became increasingly intricate. I can't control it, Galen panted between steps. Her skin pulsed with waves of light, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. Outside, chaos reigned. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled over the intercom. We're detecting dangerously high levels of trill pheromones in the experiment chamber. We need to neutralize them immediately. Ambassador Thorne's commanding tone cut through the din. Captain Thomas, locate Dr. Vex and his followers. They must be behind this. Inside the chamber, Galen's dance abruptly ceased. She stumbled, falling against Powell. Her eyes, when they met his, burned with an intensity that took his breath away. Powell, she murmured, her voice husky. I need you. Now. Before he could respond, she pulled him into a passionate kiss. Powell's mind reeled, caught between desire and concern. This wasn't the Galen he knew. The pheromones were affecting her human side now, amplifying her emotions to an alarming degree. Galen, wait, he managed, gently pushing her back. We need to think this through. You're not yourself. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face before her expression hardened. In an instant, she was dancing again, more frenzied than before. The cycle continued, Galen oscillating between trill and human mating behaviors with increasing intensity. Powell struggled to keep up, his diplomatic training proving woefully inadequate for this unprecedented situation. Outside the chamber, Commander Zax paced furiously. We must extract the princess immediately, he demanded, moving towards the chamber's manual override. Captain Thomas blocked his path. Stand down, Commander. We can't risk contaminating the entire facility. Zax's crystalline armor glinted as he tensed. You would leave her to suffer? I thought humans valued compassion. We value the safety of all, Thomas countered, his hand moving to his weapon. The tension between them snapped. Zax lunged forward, his fist connecting with Thomas's jaw. In an instant, Trill and human security forces clashed, the room erupting into a melee of flashing armor and uniform. Princess Lyra watched the unfolding chaos, her eyes darting between the fighting security teams and the sealed chamber where her sister writhed in Powell's arms. Something shifted in her expression, a realization dawning. Stop, she commanded, her royal authority cutting through the din. Look at them, she gestured towards Powell and Galen. Even now, he protects her. Perhaps this integration is not the abomination we feared. Her words gave the combatants pause. In that moment of quiet, Dr. Volkov's voice rang out from his holding cell. I can help neutralize the pheromones, he called, but I'll need access to my research. Ambassador Thorne's eyes narrowed. And why should we trust you? Because, Volkov replied, his gaze steady, I'm the one who understands this technology best. And right now, I'm your only hope of resolving this without casualties. Thorne hesitated, then nodded grimly. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Zen, work with him, but watch him closely. As the scientific team raced against time, the situation in the chamber grew dire. Galen's transformations accelerated, her body struggling to cope with the rapid changes. Powell held her trembling form, whispering words of comfort. Stay with me, Galen, he urged. Find the balance. You're both Trill and human. Embrace it. In the control room, Captain Thomas's team, now working alongside Commander Zax's guards, cornered Dr. Vex and his followers. But as they moved in for the arrest, Vex smirked, pressing a button on a concealed device. For Trill purity, he declared as a concentrated burst of pheromones flooded the experiment chamber. Inside, Galen's body arched, a scream tearing from her throat. Her skin blazed with light, pulsing so brightly that Powell had to shield his eyes. Waves of electromagnetic energy radiated from her, shorting out the chamber's systems. As the facility's alarms blared, Powell felt the pheromones' effects dissipate. The chamber door slid open, and medical teams rushed in. Her vitals are stabilizing, Dr. Zen announced, scanning Galen's now still form. It's remarkable. Her physiology seems to have achieved perfect equilibrium between Trill and human characteristics. Galen's eyes fluttered open, meeting Powell's worried gaze. A smile touched her lips. "I remember everything," she whispered. "I understand now. Both sides of myself." As the medical team whisked Galen away for further tests, Ambassador Thorne approached Powell. "Your actions today may have just revolutionized interspecies relations," he said, his tone a mix of awe and calculation. "We need to draft a new accord immediately." Powell nodded, his mind still reeling from the events. As he turned to follow Thorne, he found Princess Lyra blocking his path. "Mr. Powell," she began, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. I was wrong about you, about humans, what you did for my sister today." She paused, composing herself. "We would be honored if you would visit our homeworld as an official guest of the royal family." Before Powell could respond, a commotion near the medical bay caught their attention. Princess Galen, now dressed in a shimmering gown that seemed to enhance her bioluminescence, strode towards them. Her bearing was regal, yet there was a new warmth in her eyes as she surveyed the assembled humans and Trills. "My friends," she addressed them, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Today we stand on the brink of a new era, an era of true understanding between our peoples, and perhaps, with time, between all sentient species in the galaxy." As Galen continued her impromptu speech, Powell felt a mix of pride, affection, and a twinge of uncertainty. He had played a part in reshaping the future of human-Trill relations. But what did that mean for his own future? For his deepening feelings for Galen? The princess caught his eye, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as diplomats, as pioneers of a new age of interspecies cooperation, and perhaps as something more. More. The air in the grand hall crackled with anticipation as Princess Galen took her place at the podium. Powell stood beside her, a steadying presence in the face of the assembled dignitaries, scientists, and media representatives from both Earth and Trill. Galen's skin pulsed softly, casting a gentle glow across the stage. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Powell's reassuring gaze. With a slight nod, she began her address. "Esteemed colleagues, honored guests, fellow seekers of unity," Galen's voice rang out, clear and strong. "We stand at the threshold of a new era in human-Trill relations, an era born not from fear or mistrust, but from understanding and acceptance." As she spoke, her bioluminescence responded to her emotions, creating a mesmerizing display. Waves of blue and green rippled across her skin, punctuated by bursts of golden light. The audience watched, transfixed, as Galen recounted her journey. "I came to Earth wary of human mating practices, believing them incompatible with our Trill ways," she continued, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "But through unexpected circumstances and the patience of those around me, I discovered a truth. Our differences need not divide us. They can unite us, opening doors to experiences and connections we never imagined possible." Powell felt a surge of pride as he watched Galen command the room. Her words were having a visible effect on the audience, with both humans and Trills leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the back of the hall. Dr. Vex, his face contorted with rage, burst through the doors. In his hands, he clutched a strange, pulsating device. "You betray our people," Vex shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "I will not let you corrupt our pure Trill biology." As security forces converged on Vex, Powell's training kicked in. Without hesitation, he threw himself in front of Galen, shielding her with his body. The princess's eyes widened in surprise, her skin flaring with a brilliant burst of light. "Powell, what?" Galen began, but her words were cut short as Vex activated his device. A wave of energy swept through the hall, washing over everyone present. Powell braced himself, expecting pain or discomfort. Instead, he felt a strange tingling sensation spreading through his body. Gasps and exclamations filled the air as the energy field interacted with Galen's unique physiology. Her bioluminescence intensified, becoming almost blinding. The energy seemed to resonate with her, creating a feedback loop that amplified its effects. Powell watched in amazement as his own skin began to glow faintly. Around him, humans and trills alike were experiencing similar phenomena. The trill's bioluminescent patches flared to life, while humans' skin took on a subtle, otherworldly sheen. For a brief, extraordinary moment, every individual in the hall experienced a blend of human and trill sensations. Powell felt the ebb and flow of bioluminescent communication, a symphony of light and emotion he had never imagined possible. Beside him, Galen gasped as she experienced the full depth of human tactile sensation, every nerve ending alive with new awareness. As quickly as it had begun, the effects subsided. The hall fell into stunned silence, broken only by the sound of Dr. Vex's device clattering to the floor. The rogue scientist stood frozen, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. I didn't know, Vex whispered, sinking to his knees. Security personnel moved in, gently restraining him without resistance. Ambassador Thorne was the first to recover. He strode to the podium, his eyes bright with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice trembling slightly, "what we have just experienced is nothing short of revolutionary. I propose we establish a joint human trill research program to explore the potential of Princess Galen's hybrid physiology. Together, we can unlock new frontiers of interspecies, understanding, and compatibility." The proposal was met with thunderous applause from both human and trill delegates. As the excitement built, Powell turned to Galen, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, searching her face for any sign of distress. Galen's skin shimmered with a mix of colors, reflecting her tumultuous emotions. "I'm more than all right, Powell," she replied, her voice filled with wonder. "For the first time, I truly understand what it means to be both trill and human, and I want to explore it further, with you." Their moment was interrupted as Princess Lyra approached, her regal bearing softened by a newfound warmth in her eyes. "Sister," she said, embracing Galen, "I owe you an apology. What I just felt, it has opened my eyes to the beauty of your union with Powell. I believe it's time for our people to fully embrace the possibility of human-trill partnerships." As the implications of Lyra's words sank in, the hall buzzed with renewed energy. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Zen were already deep in discussion, sketching out plans for what would soon become the Galen Institute for Interspecies Biology. Nearby, Commander Zax and Captain Thomas shook hands, agreeing to combine their expertise in a joint security initiative. Powell watched as Dr. Volkov was escorted into the hall, his expression cautiously hopeful as Ambassador Thorne outlined the terms of his conditional pardon and new role at the Galen Institute. Amidst the flurry of activity, Powell felt a gentle tug on his hand. He turned to find Galen looking at him with a mix of love and excitement. "Powell," she said, her skin pulsing with a soft, rosy glow, "I think it's time we made our own announcement." Understanding dawned on Powell's face. With a nod, he led Galen back to the podium. As they faced the assembled crowd, their hands intertwined, Powell felt a sense of rightness settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bridging the gap between their species and paving the way for a new era of interstellar cooperation. The hall fell silent as Powell cleared his throat, ready to share their news with the world. Galen's skin shimmered with anticipation, her bioluminescence creating a halo of light around them, both as they prepared to take the next step in their extraordinary journey together.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.